I worked hotel maintenance for over a decade, and almost nothing surprises me anymore. But this did. I spent 11 years fixing things in hotels. Broken AC units, flooded bathrooms, strange guest complaints. You name it, I've seen it. People act differently when they stay somewhere temporary. They think rules don't apply. After a while, you stop being shocked. That's why I know what happened that night wasn't in my head. It was a Tuesday, just before 11 p.m. I was on the 4th floor checking an HVAC unit when my radio crackled. A routine call came in, room 1312, bathroom issue. The voice was calm, nothing urgent. I radioed back to confirm. There was a pause. Too long. Then Maya, the overnight desk clerk, asked me to repeat the room number. 1312, I said again. Another pause. Then she told me to come down to the front desk. When I got there, she was standing back from the computer, arms crossed, staring at the screen like it had offended her. She pulled up the building layout and pointed. Floors 1 through 12, she said. There is number 13. I told her I knew that. She hesitated, then said the hotel used to have a 13th floor. A long time ago. Something happened in the late 90s, before either of us worked there. The floor was sealed off. No one used it anymore. As far as I know, she added, no one's been up there in years. She said the call had to be a system error. I told her I was going to check anyway. She didn't like that idea. Said I shouldn't go alone. I told her I'd be 10 minutes. The access door was on the 12th floor, hidden behind a utility panel I had walked past hundreds of times without thinking. The bolt looked ancient, like it should have been rusted shut. It wasn't. It resisted, but it moved. When I pushed the door open, the smell hit me first. Stale air like a sealed room, but underneath that, something else. Something lived in. The hallway was pitch dark. I turned on my flashlight. Dust covered everything. The carpet was thick, old-fashioned, probably from the 80s. Wallpaper peeled off in long strips. Every door was closed. At first, it looked exactly how an abandoned floor should look. Then I saw the path. Right down the center of the hallway, the dust was disturbed. Not just once, over and over again. A clear trail from frequent use. It led straight to the last door on the right. Room 1312. The door was slightly open. A thin line of pale light leaked from inside. I stood there, listening. Nothing. I pushed the door open. Someone had been living there. A bedroll on the floor. Stacks of canned food. A duffel bag with clothes spilling out. A battery lantern still warm. Everything else was covered in grime, except the areas that were being used. The desk. The floor near the bed. The bathroom doorway. I stepped into the bathroom. The mirror stopped me cold. Names. Dozens, maybe hundreds, written across the entire surface. From top to bottom. Some were faded, barely visible. Others were darker, newer. They weren't written with marker. I didn't need to touch it to know that. I was still reading when I heard something. The stairwell door at the end of the hall. I turned off my flashlight immediately and froze. Footsteps. Slow. Come. Unhurried. They moved down the hallway toward the room. I held my breath. The steps stopped just outside the door. I could hear breathing. Steady. Relaxed. Like whoever it was had all the time in the world. Like they either didn't know I was there, or didn't care. Then, after a moment, the footsteps turned and walked away. Back down the hall. The stairwell door opened. Closed. Silence again. I waited 2 full minutes before moving. On my way out, something made me check under the bed. There was a wooden box hidden there. Inside, key cards. Dozens of them. Old ones, new ones, different designs from different years. Each one labeled with room numbers in black marker. Below that, photographs. My stomach dropped as I flipped through them. Guests. Taken without their knowledge. Through windows. From hallways. Through cracked doors. There were hundreds. At the bottom was a separate stack, held together with a rubber band. All the same woman. Different times. Different outfits. Over what looked like months. The photos got closer each time. The last one. She was asleep in a hotel bed. And I recognized her. Not personally, but from the news. A woman who had checked into the hotel a few years earlier and never checked out. They found her miles away. The case was never solved. I called 911 from the stairwell. Police arrived and searched the floor. The room was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. No clear entry point. No sign of how they got in or out. They took the box. Photographed the mirror. The next morning, a detective called me. She asked if I had touched the mirror. I said no. She paused. Then she told me something I still think about every day. There was a name at the very bottom of the mirror, written smaller than the rest. It hadn't been there long. It was my name. And underneath it, my work schedule for the week. Day by day. I never went back to that hotel. I don't know how long that floor was being used. I don't know how many of those names mean what I think they mean. And I don't know who was standing outside that door that night. But I'm sure of one thing. Whoever wrote my name on that mirror knew exactly where to find me. The moment my body froze, I knew something nearby wanted us, and it wasn't a feeling I could ignore. There's a small lake near where I grew up. It's the kind of place locals love, quiet, surrounded by trees, with a walking trail and picnic spots. On the far side of the lake, there's a popular swimming area, including a small cliff about 10 feet high where people like to jump into the water. I used to go there all the time with friends. One Saturday, though, it was just me and Kay. Kay was my youth pastor's girlfriend. She was a few years older than me, maybe around 20, and someone I really trusted. She was outdoorsy, calm, and the kind of person who made you feel safe just being around her. That day, she invited me to go swimming, and I didn't hesitate. When we got there, it was unusually quiet. No other cars. No voices. Just us. We hiked around to the swimming spot and slipped into the water. It wasn't the cleanest lake, but it felt good in the heat. We were laughing, talking, just enjoying the day. Then something changed. Out of nowhere, I felt it. A sharp, twisting sensation in my stomach. Not pain exactly. More like a sudden drop, like my body reacting before my mind could catch up. My hearing sharpened. My vision felt focused in a strange, intense way. I stood up quickly in the shallow water, clutching my chest. Kay noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because in that silence, we both heard it. Voices. Faint at first, drifting across the water from around the bend. We couldn't see anyone yet, but we saw the ripples. A boat was coming. My chest loosened just slightly as I took a slow breath. Kay and I locked eyes. Neither of us moved. We listened. And then we heard them clearly. 3 men. Talking. Laughing. And then saying things that made my entire body go cold. They were talking about us. They hadn't seen us yet, but they knew someone was there. They started discussing, casually, which one of us they would take. Who would get who. Like we weren't people. Like we were objects. One of them told the others to be quiet, but the damage was already done. The sound carried perfectly over the water. Every word reached us. Kay didn't panic. She didn't speak. She just slowly raised a finger to her lips, quiet, and then pointed toward the edge of the cliff. I nodded. We moved. I have never moved that carefully or that quickly in my life. Within seconds, we were out of the water, climbing up the side of the rock as quietly as possible. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. The second we reached the top, we saw the boat. It rounded the bend slowly. Searching. Kay grabbed my arm and pulled me back, signaling for silence again. We crouched low and moved away from the edge. Our shoes and towels were still down by the trees, but we didn't stop for anything. We left everything behind. Once we were far enough from the shoreline, Kay looked at me, and that was the moment we both broke. We ran. Barefoot. As fast as we could. The trail circled the entire lake, and for most of it, you stayed within about 30 feet of the water. That meant they could still see us if we weren't careful. As we ran, we heard the boat engine start. Loud. Aggressive. They were moving now. Looking. Calling out to each other. Trying to figure out where we went. We darted on and off the trail, using trees for cover, staying low when we could. My feet were already cut up from rocks and branches, but I didn't feel it. Adrenaline had taken over everything. We didn't stop. Not once. For nearly 10 minutes, we ran full speed around that lake. By the time we reached the parking area, I could barely breathe. The lot was empty. Still no one else. Kay fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them once before unlocking the car. We both jumped in and slammed the doors. As she started the engine, I looked back toward the water. I could see the boat in the distance. Still circling. Still searching. They hadn't seen us leave. We sped out of there faster than I'd ever driven away from anything. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. Then everything hit at once. My hands started shaking. My chest felt tight again. Kay was trying to dial 911, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. She dropped her phone twice before finally getting through. She tried to explain what happened, her voice trembling. I looked down and realized my feet were bleeding. I hadn't even noticed. She reached over at a stoplight and grabbed a napkin from the console, pressing it against one of the cuts while still talking to the operator. We didn't stop driving until we were back in town, where there was signal, people, noise, anything that felt normal. Later, we gave statements. I don't know if those men were ever found. The lake is still open. Still popular. People still go there every weekend. Swimming. Laughing. Jumping off that same cliff. Most of them probably think it's peaceful. But I know better. Because something in me recognized the danger before I even understood it. And if we had stayed in that water just a minute longer, I don't think we would have made it out. The storm didn't scare me, the house did, and I realized that too late. I was halfway through a 4-hour drive back to school when everything went wrong. I'd made that trip dozens of times. Same roads, same turns. I could almost do it from memory. But that night, I left later than I should have, and about 2 hours in, the weather turned fast. No. Heavy. Then worse. A full whiteout. My headlights reflected straight back at me, like I was driving into a wall. I slowed to a crawl, hazard lights blinking. Leaning forward over the wheel like that would somehow help me see better. I should have pulled over. I didn't. The road curved, and I misjudged it. The right side tires slipped off the edge, and before I could correct it, the car slowly slid nose first into a ditch. It wasn't violent. Just helpless. And then I was stuck. The engine was still running, but I wasn't going anywhere. Snow piled up against the passenger side. No signal. No other cars. Just darkness in every direction. Except one. About a quarter mile back down the road, there was a house. 2 lights on in the windows. I hadn't noticed it when I passed, but now it felt like my only option. I waited in the car for about 10 minutes, hoping another car would come by. Nothing did. So I grabbed my jacket and started walking. The closer I got, the more something felt off. The property looked abandoned at first glance. There was a collapsed structure off to the side. Old equipment half buried in snow. A dead tree near the porch, wrapped tightly in what looked like rope. And hanging above the front door, wind chimes, made of small bones. I told myself they were animal bones. decorations. People had weird tastes. Still, I hesitated before knocking. Then I did it anyway. The man who opened the door was older, maybe late 60s. Tall, with pale eyes that didn't quite line up when he looked at me. He smiled immediately, and held that smile just a little too long. I explained my situation. He nodded slowly. Then, without breaking eye contact, he called into the house. A woman appeared behind him. Small, gray hair, wearing an apron like something out of an old photograph. She clasped her hands together and said, "Oh, good." That was it. Not "come in," not "are you okay?" Just, "Oh, good." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Still, I stepped inside. The heat hit me first. Not warm, hot. Overwhelmingly hot after the freezing air outside. It made me feel slightly dizzy. Then the smell. Something cooking. Meat, maybe. But underneath that, something older. Heavier. A smell I couldn't place, but couldn't ignore either. The house was cluttered. Papers stacked everywhere. Jars lining the windows. Symbols on the walls. Some looked familiar, like crosses, but slightly wrong. Altered in ways I couldn't explain. There were no family photos. Nothing personal. Like no one had ever really lived there. They led me into the kitchen. A man sat at the table. Younger than the other two. Maybe 40. Heavy set. Silent. He didn't stand. Didn't greet me. He just watched. Not angry. Not friendly. Just watching. I explained again that I just needed to wait out the storm, that I'd leave as soon as I could. The older man smiled and gestured for me to sit. Like the seat had been waiting for me. Before I could say anything else, the woman placed a plate in front of me. I hadn't asked for food. I hadn't even said I was hungry. But there it was. A thick, dark stew. Chunks of meat and vegetables. A piece of bread on the side. She stepped back. All three of them were looking at me. Waiting. I said thank you and tried to decline. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm not really hungry." The older man's smile didn't fade. "You should eat," he said calmly. "It will help. You're cold." The woman said nothing. The younger man still hadn't moved. They were all watching the plate. Not me. The plate. There was something about the moment that felt structured, like a ritual. And I understood something very clearly. Not eating was not an option. So I picked up the spoon. Took a bite. The taste was wrong. Not spoiled. Not rotten. Just wrong. The meat didn't taste like anything I could name. It wasn't beef, or chicken, or anything familiar. It was soft, almost too soft. And it sat heavy in my stomach immediately. I forced myself to keep going. Half the bowl. Then I stopped. Told them it was good. That I was full. The older man nodded. And just like that, the tension in the room shifted. Slightly. Like I had passed something. After a while, the younger man stood up and went outside. When he came back, he said he could pull my car out with his truck. Relief hit me so fast I almost felt weak. I stood up too quickly, nearly knocking my chair over. The older man walked me to the door. He shook my hand and held it a second too long. "Drive safe," he said. Still smiling. The woman stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. Still smiling too. The younger man pulled my car out without saying a word. Didn't look at me. Didn't wait for thanks. He just got back in his truck and drove back to the house. I didn't even hesitate. I got in my car and left. I drove the remaining 2 hours without stopping once. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just drove. And I didn't fully relax until I was inside my apartment with the door locked. About 6 weeks later, a friend sent me a news article. A local investigation. A rural property. The location was familiar. Details were limited. Something about a missing person case. Ongoing investigation. No arrests. I contacted the authorities and gave a statement. They said they might follow up. They never told me more. I still think about that night. About the way they looked at me. About the way the room changed after I ate. And sometimes, late at night, I can still remember the taste of that stew. And no matter how hard I try, I can't figure out what it was made of. We stayed there for 3 nights, and only later did I realize how close we came to never leaving. Back in the summer of 1999, I was about to start high school. That year, I went on a church trip with 6 other girls and 3 adult chaperones. We traveled all the way from Southern California up to Washington State in an old van and a station wagon. It was supposed to be a fun, meaningful trip. And for the most part, it was. We visited landmarks, stopped in different cities, and spent time at places we'd only ever seen in pictures. Somewhere along the way, we stayed for a few nights at a lodge near Yosemite National Park. At the time, it felt completely normal. Looking back, it doesn't. The place was called Cedar Lodge. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable enough. Surrounded by trees, quiet, a little isolated, but that's kind of what you expect in a national park. We stayed there for 3 nights. I don't remember anything specifically strange happening while we were there. No weird noises. No bad encounters. Nothing that made us feel unsafe. If anything, it was peaceful. Which is why what I learned later has stayed with me for years. During our time in Yosemite, something odd did happen, but we didn't connect it to anything at the time. Our group was traveling in an older Chevy van. One day, while we were out driving through a more remote area, the van suddenly broke down. Completely. No warning. We were stranded on the side of the road with no signal. Luckily, after about an hour, someone passed by and helped us get in touch with a mechanic. Eventually, the van was looked at, but it was beyond a simple fix. Later, the owner of the van told us something that stuck. The mechanic believed the engine hadn't just failed. He thought it had been tampered with. Intentionally. At the time, it sounded extreme. Like maybe he was just guessing or overreacting. We didn't think too much about it. We just rented another vehicle and continued the trip. The rest of the journey went on as planned. We visited more places, took photos, laughed, made memories. Nothing else seemed wrong. Eventually, we went home, and life moved on. Then, about a month later, everything changed. The news broke. A series of crimes connected to the very place we had stayed. Cedar Lodge. A man who worked there, a maintenance employee, was arrested. His name was Cary Stayner. Before his arrest, he had already committed a violent crime involving a park employee. But what shocked everyone was what came next. Not long after our stay, just weeks later, he approached a room at that same lodge late at night. He knocked on the door. And because he worked there, the people inside trusted him enough to open it. Inside were a woman, her young daughter, and her daughter's friend. He told them he needed to check something in the room. They let him in. That decision cost them everything. When I heard the story, I felt sick. Not just because of what happened, but because of how close we had been. We were there. Same place. Same time frame. For 3 nights, we slept in rooms just like theirs. We walked the same hallways. Past the same staff. Maybe even past him. I don't remember faces clearly from that trip. I can't say for sure if I ever saw him. But the possibility is enough. What unsettles me the most is how ordinary it all felt. There were no warning signs. No sense of danger. No moment where I thought, something isn't right. It was just another stop on a road trip. Another place to sleep. Another set of memories. But now, when I look back, I see it differently. I think about how easily things could have gone another way. What if he had chosen a different room? What if he had knocked on our door instead? Would we have opened it? Probably. He worked there. Why wouldn't we? That's the part that stays with me. Not something that did happen, but something that almost did. The idea that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it knocks politely in the middle of the night. It's been years since that trip, but every now and then, I think about that lodge. About those 3 quiet nights. And about how close we were to being part of a story that no one survives to tell.